Throughout the first couple of weeks of February, we've been looking at, I was kind of doing a comparison of Matthew chapter 24, and then as that plays out in Revelation chapter 6 and Daniel chapter 7. And I wanted to continue with that area a little bit tonight. Now, last week as we were finishing, we were looking at Revelation chapter 6, and because that the next section that we would get into would be actually the sixth event, I don't want to go there tonight. I want to jump back now to Matthew chapter 24, which we're going to do, and then we'll be back into Daniel again. But I want us to look, and we probably just use those two sections. I don't think we'll have enough time anyway to go much farther than that. But where we've gotten to is to the abomination of desolation. Now, the abomination of desolation takes place in the last 7 years, right in the middle of the last 7 years, apparently, and it signifies or begins the authority that the Antichrist is given for 42 months. Or for in some places, like in, say, Revelation chapter 12, it refers to it as 42 months, but it also talks about 1,260 days and times and half a time, which meaning a year, 2 years, and half a year. So all of those are used to talk about that time. When it's talking about the nation of Israel being protected by God, it talks about that she was brought into the wilderness where a place was prepared for her by God, and there she was nurtured by God for 1,260 days. So we're going to kind of look at some of that. But tonight I wanted to, again, I'm going to start back in Matthew chapter 24. That's really where we'll start. But first of all, just as a way of almost a review, just to what we've already been looking at, you know that this is December 15th will be, so December 15th is the ideal time for an attack in the Ukraine. So if there's going to be an attack in Ukraine, this is the ideal time. It's the time when normally the ground is the most frozen that it's going to be, and for the type of invasion force that would be coming against it would probably need that. And so there's a real time of danger right now. What does that have to do with anything? Now, the only thing we know for certain is that there are wars and rumors of wars. We also know that the nations that are to the north of Israel, so to the top, highest above Israel, is Russia, just a little bit to the, really right straight above Israel, and then from there on to the east will be Russia. And then on the other side of that, you know, is Finland and the other smaller countries. But right down on the western edge of Russia, there's almost a bite cut out of it. And if you were to look at it, so that they almost now are surrounding the Ukraine. And now in Russia, they say the Ukraine, meaning the Ukrainian region, which they consider to be a portion of Russia. And most of the rest just say Ukraine, meaning the nation. Ukraine is a nation, an independent nation. But they are wanting to reincorporate Ukraine into Russia. And if you were to round out that western edge of Russia, you would have Ukraine. Right above it is Belarus, which Russia has already taken that again, and it has, it's, even though it's independent in a sense, it also is very strongly under the control and influence of Moscow, and that's what they want. So there's Belarus, there's Ukraine. You may remember that the southern part of Ukraine is Crimea. Russia's already taken that. And then there's Moldova that is even south of that. And so when it talks about the bear with 3 ribs in his teeth, in Daniel, we'll look at that again maybe in a little bit. We may or may not. But when we wonder sometimes, what are those 3 ribs? And it's a possibility that may be Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova. That's a possibility. There's a couple of other thoughts, and that is Armenia and a couple in there between them and Turkey. Turkey's on the bottom side of the Black Sea, and right now the Russian military forces, Navy, is in the Black Sea, and so surrounding, really almost surrounding Ukraine. So anyway, in Crimea, and then in the Black Sea, and then in Belarus, and then in Russia proper. But if they were to take all 3 of those and add them back to Russia, Russia then would be rounded out on its western side, and then it would flank or be a next door neighbor to NATO members, Poland and others. I think there's 4 different nations there that there would be. Now we know that in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that the Russian, what the ancestors of the Russian people are the ones that will be coming against Israel in the last days, along with Turkey and with Iran. So Turkey is just to the south of all of that, and then on the western side and on the eastern side is Iran, and then Iraq, of course, just below that, and Syria. And so anyway, I'm not going to go any farther than that, just to say that. But we're seeing this building up of military forces. So as Jesus was leaving the temple on the last week of his ministry, on the week of his passion, the disciples came and asked him, when he told him about the temple and all that, and he has spoken to them and said that not one stone would be left upon another in Jerusalem. And so they're asking, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming in at the end of the age? So you'll remember that he is answering that, and he said, see to it no one misleads you. There'll be wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not frightened. Those things must take place. So that's where we probably are, wars and rumors of wars. And there's going to be now the wars that will begin those last wars. And that's what we may wake up in the morning and find out that war has already begun. Or it may be that it's put off for a while. We don't know that. Now, when we get far enough into it, we should know pretty close to just exactly when it will be. But right now we don't. So, but the main thing he says, wars and rumors of wars, don't be frightened. That's not the end. Nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, various places, famines and earthquakes. And now famines and earthquakes will be part of the Ezekiel 38-39 war when they come against Israel, and God will send down strong judgments against the earth so that there will be a worldwide earthquake. Apparently, what I believe will be a comet that will hit in such a way that large chunks of ice, rock, molten rock, fire, burning sulfur will fall on those troops, and the theist among them will recognize that they have made a bad mistake in joining with the atheists, and they will begin to fight so that every man's sword will be against the other. And there will be a worldwide earthquake. So we studied about that, I believe, in January. So you might want to go back and look at that if you haven't, because that is an event that's going to affect you. It will affect you no matter where on earth you are, because it will be a worldwide earthquake. Every man will quake in his presence at that time. But all those things are just the beginning of birth pains. That's not yet the end, but it's the beginning of the end. That's the beginning of birth pains. That's where we got to on February the 1st. We finished there. And then last week we looked at, then they will deliver you to tribulation. Now, in the King James, it said to affliction, but the word here is the exact same word that is used later to talk about the Great Tribulation. It is the word that is would normally be translated tribulation. Great pressure, great penalty, but they will deliver who? You to tribulation, and will kill you, and you'll be hated of all nations because of my name. Jesus is telling his disciples that the day is coming. Now, after this war, so there's a war coming. After that war, after the outpouring of God's wrath on that army and upon the world will be different because of that. And so there's going to be a great amount of death and carnage, and all of that will take place. And immediately after that, there's going to be then this persecution against the church, against Christians. So Christians all over the world, and it doesn't matter if you're what nation you're in or what the national boundaries are, they will deliver you to tribulation, and you'll be hated in every nation. There's not a nation where they'll say, we're Christian to the point that you will not be hated. To be a Christian, it will be to be hated and to be in danger of losing your life. And in fact, your life very well. Many Christians will die during that time. And now, if we were back in Revelation chapter 6, this would be the fifth seal. So the fourth seal has to do with mainly those things that we just talked about, and the famine and all that goes along because of that. But the breaking of the fifth seal is the persecution against the church, this time where that many will be put to death during that period of time. So in this tribulation, you might think this is as bad as it could get, that it couldn't get any worse, because there will be a great hatred of Christianity, especially Christianity, and the Jews will become Christian as well, as you can read. And I think many times when I'm doing these studies, I don't realize until I listen to them and making the video to put on YouTube and on Parler, I don't recognize until it's not Parler, what is it? But anyway, Rumble. I don't realize until I'm making that as many times I misspeak, and of course then I hear it when I'm saying it. So I think I said Ezekiel last week, but it's Zechariah chapter 12, 13 and 14, where it describes how that all the nations of the world will come against Israel, but Israel will become Christian. They will look upon him whom they've pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only son, and they will turn to him. And so they'll turn to him en masse. And so, and it even says in one place that all Israel will be saved. And that, of course, is the New Testament. But so there is a great revival coming, especially for Israel. I would like to believe that'll be a worldwide revival, and many have taught that. I don't know that you could prove that biblically. Maybe you could, but I can't think how you would go about doing that. But I hope that there will be a great revival. But there will also be a time of persecution that will be unparalleled. So this first tribulation, it's called, they will deliver you to tribulation. But down just later in this same chapter, he will talk about megas thalipsis, meaning great tribulation. And this is Jesus talking about that. So there's tribulation in the first 3.5 years, but there's great tribulation in the last 3.5 years. And in that, unless the Lord has spared some, probably no flesh would be left alive. But for the elect's sake, he said he would shorten the days. Talking about in the time of the Great Tribulation. So then they will deliver you to tribulation. So we've read about that. At that time, many will fall away, betray one another, hate one another. False prophets will arise, will mislead many, because lawlessness is increased. Most people's love will grow cold. You might say, well, you know what? That sounds like today. And there's a sense in which, as we've gone from birth pains to the time getting closer and closer to the center part of this, to the middle of this, we'll see that there's more and more of these events that are taking place as we get closer and closer to the abomination of desolation, which takes place in the last 1260 days. So the first 1260 days, there will be tribulation, there will be trouble. But the last 1260 days, there will be great tribulation, and it's going to be different, and it will have the ability to really to just about control most of the aspects of our life, to the point of making it almost impossible to live, except for the fact that God will enable you to live. God has taken care of you this far, and God will take care of you. Nevertheless, you've got to realize that if you live into this time, there's a good probability that you will give your life for the gospel, that because of your salvation, because of your faith in Jesus Christ. It probably will cost you your life if you live into this time. That's just going to be the way it is, and you need to just realize that if it does, you're still better off, because what is left will be worse than what you've gone through up to that point. And so the sooner and I'm not saying try to make it as quickly as possible. You've got to live as long as the Lord enables you to escape and evade and do all the things that you need to do. Then you need to do that. But nevertheless, you need to realize that probably you, especially those of us that are very open and in our faith and our have some testimony that's out there, will probably be captured and imprisoned and then finally killed in due time. And that's just a fact, and so we won't worry about that. But just be prepared for that. The gospel is, this is where we had stopped in last week. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. Now the end time is the last 1260 days. It begins, those last 3.5 years begins with the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. And so that's where we're going to, that verse 15, as we're going to look at tonight, and then we're going to go into Daniel. And so in the few minutes that we have left, that's what we're going to be looking at, is then the rest, the places that fulfill this, so that we know what we can know about it, we need to know. And so I'm going to try to give you as much of that as I can at one time. So anyway, that's where we left off. Now, then the end will come. So the gospel of the kingdom probably has been preached into all the world for a witness. Do you think so? As a testimony to all the nations. And so in almost every ethnos, every ethnic group, there has been a testimony. There is probably scripture written in every language of every tribe and people and tongue. I think that with the and also with the languages that the gospel is going out in all parts of the world, almost everyone speak one of the languages that the gospel is being preached by satellite or by internet or in other ways, so that almost everyone has access to the gospel. And so the gospel has been preached and is being preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations. He said when that has happened, and I can't imagine it not being fulfilled by now. I thought that maybe it had been fulfilled many, many years ago. And so today I'm almost positive. In fact, I think we're almost going the other way around, so that some of the younger generations may be less likely to have heard the gospel, even in America, than all the world had heard just a few years ago, even in the farthest corners of the earth. But anyway, but he says, and then the end will come. So the end will come at that point. Now here's how the end begins, the abomination of desolation. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. This is, to me, one of the most important verses to understand the times. So they ask him, when will these things be, meaning the destruction of Jerusalem? what will be the sign of your coming and the sign of the end of the age? So those are the things they've asked. And so this is the sign of the end of this age. And that is the last 1,260 days, if you can see it in its fullness. The last 1,260 days begins with the abomination of desolation spoken of through Daniel the prophet. So we really need to look into that and say, okay, how will I recognize it? Because you notice there he says, let the reader understand. Now, when he says, let the reader understand, that is somewhat, you could almost say, a petition, a prayer, but it also has the idea of a command. You're the reader. The reader is to understand. And my concern is that so many people have skipped this area of study, and they've looked at other things about the gospel, other things that Jesus has spoken, and all of that, but they've not zeroed in on this. This is absolutely vital. Jesus said, if you're going to understand the times, you've got to understand what he said about the abomination of desolation spoken of through Daniel the prophet. So that's what I want us to look at then tonight. Next, I want us to go then, and we'll look at Daniel. I'm going to begin in Daniel. I'll remind us where we are to this point, and then we'll go on from there. But you may remember that Daniel is taken by vision, and he's taken to the end of time, or to the last of this age, the very time we're talking about. And as he's looking in our time, the four winds of the heaven were stirring up the great sea of humanity. So northeast, south, and west. And I talked about that in, I think it was the first week of February. But anyway, and four great beasts were coming up from the sea. Now that's the way it is today. The first in order of the, almost like the king of the beast, you could almost say, but also the first in power today, the first nation. The first was like a lion that had the wings of an eagle. So the lion is the Anglo system. I'm very concerned about some of the things that's happening to the Anglo system right now. When you think about not as much England as Canada and Australia and the United States, I'm somewhat concerned about it. But it is the lion. It's the big one, in my opinion. It's the first among the nations of the world, of the empires, and this is the Western Empire. So from Israel to the west is England, and the young lions are Canada, the United States, and Australia, New Zealand, the young lions. And so, but it said it had the wings of an eagle. And I think that the United States and its wings have provided the strength or the power that have kept the Anglo lion in this dominant position for as long as it has, is because of the wings of the aircraft that have been developed in the United States. But anyway, so the lion had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking till its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind was given to it. So you'll remember that was the first one. The second beast was like a bear, raised up on one side, 3 ribs were in its mouth and between its teeth, and thus they said to it, arise, devour much meat. And so in Ezekiel 38:39, we see that it's God himself. I know that the Russian bear thinks, the leader of Russia thinks that he's in charge, that he is deciding when he will attack, whom he will attack, whatever is going on. He thinks that he's in charge of all that, but that's not true. God said he would throw out his fish line and put a fish hook in his jaw and draw him out. And so he is being drawn out by God. And if he'd just leave well enough alone, he could probably live until, some other more powerful person killed him off, but he could live for a long time. But because that of this obsession that is being placed into him. He is being baited. He's being pulled out, and sensing weakness in the West, and with connections with his strength with the East, and various things. He thinks this is the right time to reassemble what was at one time the Russian Federation or the Soviet Union. And he's trying to put the band back together again by adding the Ukraine, the Poland, and Czechoslovakia, and all of those nations, all the way down into Germany, actually. Even East Germany was considered part of that, in that orbit at one time. And they will be also. It mentioned Gomer in Ezekiel 38, so they also will be part of that. That's brought back together during this. So he is determined. I mean, it's been his desire to bring it all back together, and because of that, he's sensing weakness and sensing the timing and saying this is the time. And so it will not surprise me at all if tomorrow we see that he has attacked, and I don't know how far it will go, but I remember many years ago when we were studying this, and I mean a lot of years ago, that one of you asked the question, how will we know when this army, if this is the army, and when? And I said, when they cross the Caucasus Mountains is when I would know. Well, I'm saying at this point, the armies are assembling. Now, when they will actually come out, I can't tell you the day or any of those things, but I believe that we've got to really be watching, because you assemble an army like this, and you see the armies that are assembling, you see the timing, that weather and the climates and all of that set up, and you see that if you're going to do it, like if you're going to do it this year, you're going to do it this month, and that sort of thing. It could still be a couple of weeks, but probably these days we're probably within 24 to 48 hours of that most optimal time to do this, to cause it to happen. And so it won't surprise me at all if we wake up tomorrow and find that Ukraine is now under Russian domination again and control. But he is told, they said to it, who said to it? They said to it, arise, devour much meat. And so he is seeing the possibility not only of taking the nations that were part of the Soviet Union or the Russian Federation, but also to see how that he will take over the nations that are below it. So below that, just not only to take say Iran. Now Iran will be one of those. Turkey on one side, Iran over on the eastern side, Turkey on the western side. But Iran has wanted to take Iraq for a long while, and it's what separates them from some of those. So they will see their aspirations to take Iraq and to take Syria, and the Russians are working into Syria. And Turkey is also right there, and all of them coming down through there, each of them with their own agenda. And the bear will have his agenda, Turkey will have their agenda, Iran will have their agenda, China has theirs, North Korea has theirs, and yet they all will be coming together. And so he says, arise, devour much meat, like an invitation to, this is the time to do it. After this, he said, I kept looking, and behold, a leopard. We're not going to get into that. I mentioned that, and that's where we left off last week. But the dominion is given to this, then the fourth kingdom. Now, I'm going to, at this point then, that's when we would get into the abomination of desolation. Because he said in Matthew chapter 24, he said, when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Now, I'm going to leave off in chapter 7 for a little bit now to bring in this teaching that is in 3 other places in Daniel about the abomination of desolation. And because I want us to recognize, I want us to know that, because Jesus said, when you see it, you're to recognize it. So I'm going to start with Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. So you're to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. So from the time of from the issuing of the decree to until the time of Jesus, there would be, and a total of 2 different times that the temple would be built back. And so there's 7 weeks and 62 weeks, or 69 weeks altogether. And so he started out with 70 weeks, if we had read earlier in chapter 9. And so that leaves 1 week of years. So there's 69 weeks of years that until the temple is destroyed. Now, the temple has been destroyed. Time has stopped. Now, after 62 weeks, the second period of time, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. So that took place in AD 70 AD. The Roman armies, Titus and the Roman armies, destroyed the temple, destroyed Jerusalem, and this was fulfilled literally. And after the Messiah was cut off, leaving him with nothing, and you know that the Messiah has ascended into heaven, from which he will return someday soon. Now, the people of the prince who is to come, and now the prince who is to come, I believe, because every other place it talks about the prince is talking about demonic spirits, I think this is talking about the people of that demonic spirit that is to come in the last day, that will possess the Antichrist. So that's the prince. The prince is the spirit of the Antichrist. So the people of the prince who is to come. Now some have believed here that this is talking about that the Roman people will be, the Antichrist will come from the Roman people. I don't believe that's what it's saying. I think it's talking about the people of Satan, the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. In other words, those who would destroy it will be influenced by the devil and by his work. And so the city, first of all, it will come with a flood. Its end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be war. Desolations are determined. That's the same thing that Jesus said. There will be wars and rumors of wars. Say that you're not frightened. This is not yet the end. And then it talks about the birth pains and about all that. So we followed that through in Daniel chapter 7. We followed it up to that point, but also in Revelation chapter 6 and in Matthew chapter 24. But then you get down to verse 15 in Matthew chapter 24, and it talks about the abomination of desolation. And so those desolations that are determined, that opens to the teaching of Daniel 9:27. And this is one of the most significant verses to understand Bible prophecy, to understand the timing. Daniel 9:27, he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. Now, we've talked about this a lot, and it actually, the word says, and I'm not going to go back to that tonight, but it says, it literally, he will confirm the covenant with the many for 1 week. And so I've told you why I believe that this is confirmation of the Abrahamic covenant. By the way, I was teaching, some of you heard me teach on that many, many years before the Abrahamic covenant was confirmed in September of 2020. So long before that, I said that the Abrahamic covenant would be confirmed. I'm not saying that the confirmation of the covenant in September of 2020 was that confirmation that this is talking about. I can't say that it's not, but I'm not saying that it is. The one thing that I don't see in that is any reference to 7 years, because it says he will confirm the covenant with the many for 1 week, meaning 1 7-year period. Now, there's only 1 7-year period left. There's been 69 weeks of years already have passed. The temple has existed during that period of time. But now the temple needs to be at least, whether it may be nothing more than the tabernacle like Moses put up in the wilderness, or it may be that the temple itself will be completely rebuilt with everything, with all of the plaza and moat and all of the things that go on with that. It may be that it will be, everything will be rebuilt. But you might say, well, that'll take a long time to build. But they say that it will not take very long at all to build. Once they've been given the agreement, they've got everything ready, and they will do it very quickly. So they probably, from the time, and that's one of the things that make me think that the covenant has not been confirmed at this point. There was a confirmation of the covenant that God made with Abraham. That is true. That has happened in September of 2020. However, it did not mention 1 week or a 7-year period, and it did not give them the ability to rebuild the temple. They haven't started on rebuilding the temple, and that also needs to take place. So, in my opinion, I'm thinking one way or another that the temple needs to be reinstituted. The sacrifice needs to be reinstituted as well, and that there's a lot of different things on that I'm not going to try to get into. But he will confirm the covenant with the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, and so the word middle there, you could say, well, the middle of the week could be sometime close to the 1,260 days or the 42 months, somewhere close to that. But I think it's more specific than that, because the idea is like the idea of midnight. Midnight, you could say, is the middle of the night. The middle of the night could be anything from maybe 10 o'clock until 3 o'clock in the morning or something. But midnight is a very specific time. That's 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock, and it separates one watch from the other. And this is much that same idea. So in the middle of the week, he'll put a stop to the sacrifice and grain offerings. Well, what does that tell you? It means that in the confirmation of the covenant and all that went on with that, the sacrifices and grain offering had to start again. Now, the sacrifices, the grain offering is one thing. I think that the nations would be allowing that. But can you imagine what it will be like when the Jews began to sacrifice animals, and especially the amount of animals that they will sacrifice in that period of time? So as they begin to shed blood, and that blood is used in the ceremonies in the very same ways that their scripture says it's to be used, you can imagine the uproar of the nations because of that. And so the Antichrist, the one who confirmed the covenant and allowed the building of the temple, will also be the one who will turn his back on it. He will turn against it, as we may read in Daniel chapter 11, and he will begin to detest and hate this covenant. And that's part of the reason. And he will put a stop to the sacrifice and grain offerings. When he does that, he will set up the abomination of desolation. He will stop them from worshiping God, and he will make an abominable sacrifice in the temple. And in fact, according to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, which we'll read in a little bit possibly, he will set himself up in the temple of God, and displaying himself as being God. Or it's a possibility that someone else will set up a statue or an icon, or I'm not exactly sure what will be set up, because the description they give it several things would actually fit. But it says, on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even till a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So this is the first place that we see the abomination of desolation. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. So this is the first time we read about it. I'm going to read the other two passages that deal with that as well, to draw all this together in Daniel. In fact, Daniel is as far as we'll get tonight. We won't try to get into Revelation. We'll only look at then in Daniel at this point. But anyway, on the wing of abominations, now there's a possibility, because of the way this is written, that it could mean that on the wing of the temple, meaning on one of the wings of the temple, that they will set up the abomination that makes desolate. It could also mean that there could be a statue set up, some have said, or that there could be sacrifices. But so I'm not sure, but so exactly what that means. So it will be, though, from that point on for the next 1,260 days. And in fact 1,290 days, and then 1,335 days. We'll see that in just a little bit. Even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. And so the one who brings about the desolation of abomination of desolation will be made desolate in the end, and we're going to read about that as well. So then down to Daniel chapter 11, verse 29, the next place that we read about the abomination of desolation, spoken of through Daniel the prophet. At the appointed time, he will return and come into the south. But this last time, it will not turn out the way it did before. So it's talking about the wars that are going on in the Middle East at the time of the abomination of desolation. So this is wars that are taking place during those first 1,260 days, the fighting that's taking place during that period of time, the wars and rumors of wars, and all of that's going on in that. So this, the king of the north is coming back into the king of the, coming against the king of the south again, coming into the south, and actually coming into Israel. But for ships of Kittim, that means from Cyprus, which is where the Anglos have their ships, the English have their ships in Cyprus. Ships from Kittim will come against him. Therefore he will be disheartened and will return and become enraged at the Holy Covenant. So he has confirmed the Holy Covenant. Now he's become disheartened when the Anglo, and probably, I'm not sure if America will by this time have regained its ability to fly. Maybe it hasn't. Maybe it will have nothing to do with it. Maybe it'll only be the nations that are being brought forth by England. I'm not sure about that, but I think that probably American ships will probably also be part of that NATO force that will be probably coming against him. So the ships, though, that are docked there will in Cyprus will come against him. He will be disheartened when he realizes that, and he will be trying to get back to his land. So he wants to get back now to the north. He's going to try to get to the north. I think he'll try to go out through the port of Haifa, but that's going to make it almost impossible for him to get out that way, because he almost would have to go out past, the ships coming from Cyprus are probably going to make that an impossibility. I think that was his original intent, was to get his troops out onto Haifa and to get them out into the Mediterranean at that point. I don't think it's going to work. He will be disheartened and will return and become enraged at the Holy Covenant. So when he's not able to get out there, then he will come back into Israel again, and he's disheartened because he sees what's going on, and he will become enraged at the Holy Covenant. This is talking about the Antichrist, and take action so that he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. So now he's enraged. He's confirmed the covenant, but now he's enraged at the covenant, and now he's joined forces with those who forsake the Holy Covenant, those who are against the Holy Covenant. Forces from him will arise and desecrate the sanctuary fortress. So this is where the abomination of desolation, that it's made desolate, it's desecrated probably by offering sacrifices to himself, or setting himself up in the temple as being God, and desecrating so that the temple is no longer God's temple. The Jews will no longer be able to use it as God's temple, because he will make it his temple at that point. Desecrate the sanctuary fortress and do away with the regular sacrifices. So when he does this, that begins the timing of the last countdown. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. This begins the last 1,260 days, which goes into 1,290 and then the 1335. They will set up the abomination of desolation. By smooth words he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the people, the covenant. but the people who know their God will display strength and take action. So there will be Christians and there will be people who know their God, and so you could, I'm not going to go into all of that teaching tonight. We will look at it again sometime soon. And then the next place, the last place that it talks about the abomination of desolation is Daniel chapter 12. And this, I'm going to just begin reading in verse 6. And one said to the man dressed in linen who was above the water of the river, "How long will it be until the end of these wonders?" I heard the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river, as he raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it will be for a time, times, and half a time. So this is the 3.5 years. This is where the 1260 days comes in, is the time, times, and half a time. As soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. So time, times, and half a time to finish shattering the power of the holy people. Now, the holy people, I believe, will be the Christian people, Gentile Christians first, but now the Jewish Christians, and now they've become one group of people that are just called the holy people. These are the holy people that it's talking about at this point, Jews and Gentiles both, that have accepted Christ and that are waiting for him. So they're going to shatter the power, and I think it also means shattering the powers of the Jewish nation, to try to totally do away with them completely. And we know that many of them will escape over to Petra and will escape across the Jordan Valley and then be separated off because of the events that happen, and God will protect them there until all these events are completed. As for me, I heard but could not understand. So I said, "My Lord, what will be the outcome of these events?" So now he's asking. Now earlier, someone had asked the one who was dressed in fine linen, but now Daniel himself is asking, "My Lord, what will be the outcome of these events?" He said, "Go your way, Daniel, for these words are concealed, for the words are concealed and sealed up until the end time." So Daniel's not to understand fully. Daniel is to write them down so that the people of the last days will have that. So that's why Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. It's because Daniel did not understand. He was not meant to understand. It wasn't his place. But we, if we are living at this time, now if we're not, then we're not to understand either, because they're concealed and sealed up until the end time. But if we live into the end time, you may remember, begins with the abomination of desolation. He said these things were the beginning of birth pains. These things are the beginning of the end. And then this is the gospel of the kingdom preached into all the world for a witness, and then shall the end come. So the end time begins with the abomination of desolation. That's through chapter 24, Matthew 24, verse 14, then verse 15 says about the abomination of desolation. So that's what he's talking about here, sealed up until the end time, until that is to happen. And then he tells him this: many will be purged, purified, and refined, but the wicked will act wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand, but those who have insight will understand. Now, how do I know? We know that many people today do not understand these things. They're not meant to. Now, some of them, it's because they won't live to this time. It won't matter to them. They will live, they will die, and they will go and they will rest just like Daniel did, waiting for the time when they will be resurrected. And they're not meant to know. They don't need to know. They don't need insight. But God gives insight to those who need that insight. The wicked, those who are acting wickedly, they won't understand. They will continue to love what they love and to do what they do, and that none, how many of the wicked will understand? None. None of the wicked will understand. They just can't understand these things. But those who have insight, now this is not the first time he uses that. He used it in the last chapter. In chapter 11, he talks about that the people who have insight will lead many to righteousness in those days. So those who have insight, those who have that inner vision that will enable them to understand, they will understand these things, and they will understand. So when Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. He is trying to tell you, it is up to you to have insight. Let the reader understand. The one who has insight will understand. So he's talking about understanding. Wicked, if they've got wickedness in your life, don't expect to understand. But if you are seeking God's will, God's purpose, and all of that, and God will give you insight to understand. Now, here's what the understanding should be. The insight should enable you to understand in verse 11. From the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished. Now, when is that? That, you remember, that he will do away with the sacrifice, and so the grain offering and the sacrifice. And obviously, it's because of, I think, because of the fact that they're blood sacrifices. From the time that it's abolished, and he does away with it, from that time, and the abomination of desolation, set up at the same time, probably on the same day, from that time, there will be 1,290 days. Now, we know that the Antichrist was given 42 months. It tells us in Revelation chapter 12. And yet here it talks about actually 43 months, because each month, Jewish months, are 30 days. And this is 30 days more than the 42 months. So the Antichrist loses his authority after 42 months. So here's 30 days later. There's a period of time where the Antichrist has lost his authority until this 1,290 days. What happens at the 1,260 days? I think that's I've got several ideas of what I think might be happening, that the two witnesses are raised. There's several different things that will take place. Maybe the sign of the Son of Man appearing in the sky, maybe one of those things. But in 1,290 days, so there's 1,260 days, and that's when the Antichrist loses his authority. 1,290 days, he said, from the abomination of desolation, there will be 1,290 days. And then he goes, though, farther to say in the next verse, how blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains to 1,335 days. So another 45 days. So this is another month and a half. So there's 1,260 days, and we don't know what happens at the end of that, except that the Antichrist loses his authority at that point. There's 1,290 days. There's an event that takes place. I don't know what that is, but he says that talks about that that there will be that many days from the time that the abomination of desolation is set up. And so if you're alive and start counting from the abomination of desolation, and you're still alive at 1,260 days, you know that something else is going to take place in the next month, in 30 days, 1,290 days. And then the great blessing, and I believe that this one is the one where Christ himself will probably set up his kingdom on earth. And it may be that the war that starts at 1,290 days, and that he actually sets up his kingdom on earth at the 1,335 days. But I don't know that. I don't think anybody does. He doesn't say that. He just says that there will be 1,290 days. How blessed is he who keeps waiting, and only for a couple of minutes. And that is still dealing with the abomination of desolation. And that's 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. In verse 3, he says, let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come, meaning our gathering together to be with Christ, what most would call the rapture. It will not come unless the apostasy comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction. So he's telling us that concerning the coming of Christ and the gathering of the saints to be with him, it won't come unless the revelation of the Antichrist comes first. And the apostasy comes first, and then the revelation of the Antichrist, the man of lawlessness, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. So that takes place, and so those are almost, that's not all the passages that have to do with the abomination of desolation, but it is the greatest amount, I guess, that so that you have all the information, the most of the information that I could kind of put together in what we could do in 1 hour's time, especially on this. How that from the abomination of desolation, there's 1260 days to the end of the tribulation. Then from the end of the tribulation until whatever the event is that happens at 1290 days, and then the blessings at the 1335 days, and all of that goes on. But it starts with the abomination of desolation that is spoken of through Daniel the prophet. Okay, we better stop there. I think it's time. Father, we're grateful for the many blessings you pour out upon us. We're thankful, and we do ask, dear Lord, that you will guide our hearts and our minds. We know that there's some challenging days that lie just ahead of us, and I pray, dear Lord, that you'll help us to depend upon you during this time of challenge, that we will trust in you, and that we'll not be afraid, that we will know for certain, dear Lord, that that you've got this, that you'll take care of everything that concerns us. Lead us, guide us, keep us. Again, we ask that you'd meet those needs, the ones that have been mentioned, and as well as others, dear Lord, maybe that haven't been mentioned. Have your perfect will and way. Now, for all that you do, we thank you, we praise you, we give you honor and glory in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you, and let's plan to do it again. We'll talk to you later. See you later.